Hey guys, Simon from Games Deconstructed here, and today I'd like to share some game recommendations with you. I'd like to focus on a particular niche that's hard to pin down using tags, Steam curator lists, and so on, and as a result, one in which you might benefit the most of my research. And the niche described in this abomination of a last sentence is detective games, or games that make you feel like a detective. Timestamps are in the description as usual. I will try to keep any references to story elements as vague as possible to avoid spoiling anything for you. For the same reason, the footage is mostly taken from the early parts of each game. Give that subscribe button a gentle tap if you'd like to know more about future videos and make me quantifiably happier, and let's get on with the show. This one is actually a series, but the installment on your screen, which is also coincidentally the one I'd recommend you start with, is called Crimes and Punishments. You can follow that up with The Devil's Daughter, its direct sequel. I think Crimes strikes a great balance between being modern and polished enough to provide you with a fun experience, while also allowing you to be impressed by the improvements made in the sequel. The Sherlock Holmes games provide a rather cinematic, character-driven experience of following the world's best-known detective on a series of cases very subtly linked together by a rudimentary meta-plot. It's fully voice-acted, and the art style aims at being realistic rather than very stylized. The cinemacity is further enhanced by the third-person perspective and several cutie action sequences, allowing Sherlock and you to showcase a variety of skills from arm wrestling to walking along narrow planks. In terms of the detective feel, it's quite forgiving in terms of leading the player to the appropriate clues and places. During the evidence gathering phase, it can sometimes feel like you're following the detective along rather than looking for them yourself, as upon finding a plot-related element, Sherlock will in most cases distill its connection to the case and implications into a handy note for you to work with. Sometimes this process has to be helped along by the player by, say, succeeding in a minigame. There is the occasional segment of having to manually look for a name in Sherlock's archive, for example, and that feels like actual detective work, but where the game really allows you to put on your Deerstalker hat is after you've gathered enough evidence. The handy summaries of the clues are collected in Sherlock's Mind Palace, and it's your job to connect them in a way that makes sense, forming a network or quilt. The cases and evidence are structured in a way that allows for multiple interpretations, and it falls to the player to decide which one of them is more in line with the facts. You are free to proceed with any of the available deductions, of course, and the game will continue regardless of whether you've made the correct one. You can look up the answers afterwards, which I've personally always done because I got to know. For me, this process was a lot more rewarding than the preceding part of each case, and conducive to several long discussions with my backseat gaming companion/girlfriend. Anyway, if you're looking for a detective game with a traditional AAA face and body, and a forgiving but not fully linear personality, Frogware's Sherlock series might be for you. However, if you're looking for a polar opposite of what Sherlock offered, which, keeping in line with the metaphor, would be a terrifyingly indie face hiding the personality of J.K. Simmons in Whiplash, I've got a treat for you. My opinions on the return of Obra Dinn might be a little colored by the fact that it's in my top 5 of best games ever, but this everlasting devotion to the title was built on the cornerstone of it being a great detective game. Putting you in the shoes of a West India Company executive tasked with examining the disappearance of all crew members of the titular Obra Dinn, which is a ship, you will be at first visually assaulted by the very distinct Commodore 64-esque art style. And I beseech thee, give it a chance even if it wouldn't normally be your cup of tea. It isn't mine, but after I got used to it, it did an outstanding job of creating a creepy, solitary atmosphere and both helping and hindering the visual elements of investigation. So as you climb aboard, you will discover that you are able to travel back in time to the moments of crew members' deaths. You are given a crew picture and a manifest. and asked to determine who's who and the cause of death for every single one of them. And there's absolutely no hand-holding here. The identities of the sailors are as much a mystery as their demise, and as you travel between the various flashbacks, you'll use a variety of contextual factors to determine who's who. The tasks people are doing at any given moment, their accents, their clothing, sentiments towards other crew members, or just the process of elimination are all elements that can be used to try to pinpoint who's that last deckhand you're looking for. The cause of death is similar. You'll have to input it manually by choosing from a list of predetermined verbs and, if appropriate, also determining the killer. And that's another puzzle of its own, as many of the deaths are not clear-cut in the slightest and require deducing the most likely sequence of events to follow a sound you've heard or an event taking place in the background. As a result, beating the game, even though it's not very long, feels like a real achievement. If you're looking for a game that will really put your deductive reasoning to the test while spinning a tale of nautical treachery, try The Return of Obra Dinn. Now, if you'd prefer something more modern and less British than Victorian England or early 19th century England, I'd like to present to you a game taking place in a modern American small town. If you're thinking Twin Peaks, you're thinking right. Painscreek Killings takes us to a sleepy American town abandoned by all its inhabitants, in the shoes of an ambitious young reporter. A couple of years back, the town was host to an unexplained murder of a local bigwig's wife, and our job is to find out the details. As a couple years have passed, we would be hard-pressed to find any corporeal evidence, so we'll instead focus on examining the relationships between various ex-inhabitants of Painscreek, learning more about them from their diaries, the writing of which seems to be a near-universal hobby in the town. Once again, the game doesn't lead you by the hand, allowing you to access most of the town from the get-go and not really giving much instruction in terms of where to go. The idea of where to go, look next, etc. comes both from exploring the town and following what clues you've already gathered. It's kind of like an escape room in this way, with you finding a key or a note or a code and having to think about the appropriate place to apply it. The chain of clues is quite well thought out, actually. Where to go next rarely feels obvious, but I don't think I've ever gotten stuck for more than a couple of minutes. This is helped by the fact that there's more than one sequence in which you can find the clues, leading to a really great feeling of piecing the story together. The gameplay loop of trying to find a lock for the last key you found could overstay its welcome if it wasn't helped along by a very competently written plot, featuring believable internal monologues of memorable characters. Even though you don't meet them as NPCs, both me and my girlfriend had our favorites and a mental image of nearly all of them, which speaks to the quality of the writing in my opinion. I have to warn you though, the game has a very slight horror element to it, which you can fortunately skip if you're aware of it. If you're absolutely averse to being creeped out, I've included a mostly spoiler-free link in the description explaining how to avoid it. So yeah, if you're looking for a realistic, escape room-esque murder mystery in a modern American setting, don't look much further than Painscreek Killings. And staying in the escape room niche, we've got a series that's even entitled The Room. And where Painscreek Killings had simple ideas behind its puzzles raised up by an exquisite storyline, The Room has a plot that's mostly an excuse to showcase its brilliant and varied puzzles. For that very reason, you can start with any of the 4 installments of the series. We've started with 4, and the footage you see on screen is from 3, which we were playing as I was making this video. The Room puts you in the shoes of a guy who, due to work obligations, has to go into a creepy room and partake in a marathon of puzzles. Solving a puzzle opens up access to more puzzles, which in turn give you elements to solve the other puzzles you were unable to solve before. Solving each of the many puzzles is presented as a success of its own, affording both a quick dopamine hit and the means to solve another one, like a missing cog or a key that you know exactly where to put. This results in a brilliant feeling of just one more puzzle that will really keep you glued to the screen. The game, in true puzzle box and escape room fashion, focuses on very tactile, physical puzzles. Most of them feature beautifully modeled 3D objects that you can push, pull, take apart, or twist using your mouse. And this very literal representation of interacting with an object rather than just having a use button, for example, is the claim to fame of the series. Especially because after you've tinkered with the puzzle object enough, you'll be greeted with a beautiful, well thought out animation of another drawer appearing out of the side of a piece of furniture, handles turning, walls moving, and generally the object transitioning into some woodworking fever dream with the accompaniment of satisfying clicks, thuds, and other onomatopoeic sounds. If you'd like to solve a series of puzzle boxes designed by a carpenter who snorts Escher paintings for breakfast by actually trying to physically move parts of them, there is literally nothing better than The Room, which continues the trend of pieces of media entitled The Room being excellent. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope I've provided you with a title that will quench your thirst for detective work for at least some time. I'm aware that the 4 games featured in this video are far from the only ones in this vein, so a part 2 is probably in the cards for us somewhere in the future. As always, I'd love if your enjoyment of the video was reflected in you clicking one of the channel elements every YouTuber asks you to click. Cheers! Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one!